The auction hammer came down before Cole Merritt even finished reading the listing. 43 seconds. That was how long the bidding lasted on Lot 7 Alpha at the Outer Rim salvage yard. And Cole had spent 38 of those seconds choking on stale recycled air inside a rusty transit pod, watching his screen buffer on a 3-bar connection while the price ticked up past every number he had prepared for. Then it stopped. Not because someone outbid him, because everyone else dropped out. He sat there in the pod, screen frozen on the confirmation screen, his jaw doing something it had never done before, which was absolutely nothing. No words, no sound, just a man staring at a purchase total that wiped out his entire savings, his emergency fund, and the small account he had labeled, "Do not touch under any circumstances." The ship he just bought was called the Ardent Reach. Nobody had called it anything in 60 years, because nobody had talked about it at all. The Galactic Trade Assembly had buried every record tied to that name after the Vega incident. The incident itself was classified under a clearance level Cole did not have, had never had, and had no business knowing about. All he had was a grainy photograph someone had uploaded to a deep web collector forum with the caption, "Found her in Yard 7. They are going to scrap her next week." Cole had recognized the hull configuration in 4 seconds flat. He was 31 years old. He had spent his entire adult life reading about ships the way other people read about history, because for him, they were the same thing. His apartment on the station had 3 walls of physical books, which was considered eccentric. The 4th wall was a screen that he kept permanently open to a rotating feed of salvage manifests, registry databases, and decommission notices from every dock authority in the settled systems. He was, by the standards of any reasonable person, completely obsessed. And none of that mattered until the moment he saw the photograph. The Ardent Reach was not supposed to exist anymore. The official record said she had been destroyed during the Vega incident alongside the experimental fleet she had been part of. 6 ships built under a black-budget human engineering program in the early years of First Contact, when the Galactic Assembly was still deciding whether humanity was worth talking to. The program had been called Forge Protocol. The ships were not military, exactly. They were something the engineers back then had called a statement. The idea was that humans could not win a war against species who had been traveling between stars for 10,000 years. But they could build something that made those species stop and look. Something that said, "We are not what you expected." The Ardent Reach was the last ship built under Forge Protocol. She was also the one that had survived, apparently, despite everything the official record claimed. Cole had 48 hours before Yard 7 closed its access window. He spent the first 6 of those hours verifying the photograph through every method he knew, cross-referencing the hull geometry against classified schematics he had acquired through means that existed in a legal gray area. He preferred not to examine too closely. He spent the next 4 hours arranging transport, which required cashing out the last of his liquid assets and calling in a favor from a cargo runner named Pete Dunbar, who owed him one from a job 3 years back involving a misrouted container and a very annoyed Port Authority official. Pete did not ask questions. Pete never asked questions. It was his best quality. The transit pod docked at Yard 7 with 6 hours to spare. The yard was exactly what it sounded like. It was an industrial graveyard at the edge of a brown dwarf system, on a field of broken ships rotating slowly in the weak orange light. Some of them gutted down to frames, some of them still holding pressure. The yard operator was a heavyset man named Carl Briggs, who ran the whole operation out of a converted cargo container bolted to an asteroid. He had the look of a man who had stopped being surprised by anything decades ago. He looked at Cole's transfer confirmation, Then he looked at Cole. Then back at the confirmation. "You bought it," Carl said. I bought it." "The whole thing?" "Yes." Carl leaned back in his chair. It creaked in a way that suggested the chair also had opinions about this situation. "Nobody's touched that ship in 30 years. We got it as part of a bulk purchase from an assembly decommission lot. It was listed as general salvage materials. I didn't even know what it was until our scanner ran the hull registry and kicked back a restricted flag." Cole kept his face neutral. "What did you do with the flag?" "Filed a report with the Assembly Asset Bureau. They responded 4 months later with a form letter saying the vessel had no protected status and could be processed as standard salvage." Carl folded his hands on the desk. "We had her scheduled for the smelter next Tuesday." Cole felt something in his chest do a complicated thing he did not have a name for. "I'd like to see her," he said. Carl gave him a hard hat, a handheld scanner, and a look that said, "Your funeral," in that order. Then he pointed at a section of the yard about 2 kilometers out, where the orange light caught something large and dark that did not move the way the other wrecks moved. Most derelicts drift. They rotate. They list. They respond to the tiny gravitational nudges of neighboring hulks. They are dead things, and dead things move the way the void moves them. The Ardent Reach was not moving. She hung in the exact center of her registered position, like she had decided that was where she belonged, and had simply declined to go anywhere else. Her hull was dark, a matte composite that the brown dwarf's light seemed to fall into rather than bounce off. She was longer than Cole had expected from the photograph. Wider, too. Her lines were not quite like anything else humanity had built before or since, because the engineers under Forge Protocol had not been trying to build the best human ship. They had been trying to build something that looked like it came from a civilization that had been doing this for 1,000 years. They had, by most accounts, succeeded. Cole drifted toward her in the yard's small service sled, scanner in hand, and the closer he got, the quieter the universe seemed to become. There was a hatch on her port side that Carl's manifest listed as accessible. Cole found it, ran the manual override, and the hatch opened. Not with the grinding reluctance of 60 years of disuse. It opened clean, smooth. The kind of smooth that meant something inside was still maintaining pressure. He stepped inside. The lights came on. Not emergency lighting, not backup systems flickering to life. Full illumination. The warm, amber glow of a ship that had been waiting for someone to come aboard, running on whatever power source the Forge Protocol engineers had buried in her core, running quietly and patiently for 6 decades. Cole stood in the entry corridor for a long time. Somewhere deep in the ship, a system chimed once. A single tone, low and clear, like a bell struck underwater. He was going to need a bigger plan. The first thing Cole did after he got back to Carl's office was call his sister. Laura Merritt picked up on the second ring, which meant she was either worried or bored. Given that he had not called her in 3 weeks, it was probably both. "Huh, you did something," she said before he could speak. "I bought a ship." Silence. The specific silence of someone doing math they do not like the outcome of. "How much?" "All of it." More silence. "Cole, all of what?" "All of it, Laura." She did not yell. Laura never yelled. She had a way of going very quiet that was somehow worse than yelling, a stillness that radiated the energy of every possible argument compressed into a single breath. "Which ship?" she said, and her voice had gone flat in the way it always did when she was preparing to be reasonable at someone. "The Ardent Reach." The silence this time was different. Laura was 34 and worked as a systems analyst for a mid-range logistics company, which meant she knew ship registries the way Cole knew history. And her brain was clearly doing what his had done when he first saw the photograph, and which was cycling through every scrap of information tied to that name and arriving at the same impossible conclusion. "That ship doesn't exist," she said. "It does. I'm standing 40 meters from it." "Cole, that ship was destroyed in the Vega incident." "Apparently not." Another silence. Then, "Send me the photograph." He sent her 6. She went quiet for 4 minutes. He counted. When she came back, her voice had changed in a way he recognized. The shift from reasonable older sister to the person she had been before the logistics job, before the sensible apartment and the sensible life. Back when they were kids lying on their backs in a field in Ohio, reading everything they could find about the first contact years. "It's really her," Laura said. "It's really her." "What are you going to do with her?" "I don't know yet." He paused. "I was hoping you had some vacation time saved up." She was quiet again. He could hear her thinking. Laura always thought loudly. "I have 11 days, she said. "And I know someone who might be able to help. She's a field engineer, very good, worked salvage restoration for a few years before she went corporate. Her name is Diane Cole, no relation. I met her at a conference." "Can she keep it quiet?" "She kept quiet about the time I accidentally shorted out an entire conference center's power grid. Yes, she can keep quiet." Cole looked at the photograph on his screen. The ardent reach in the brown dwarf light, not drifting, not dead, just waiting. "Get here fast," he said. "The yard closes access in 4 days." Laura arrived in 2. She brought Diane Cole, who turned out to be a compact woman in her early 40s, with the kind of hands that had spent real time inside engine casings. And she brought a hard drive full of every publicly accessible document ever filed adjacent to Forge Protocol, which was not many documents, but was considerably more than the officially acknowledged 0 documents. Diane walked the ardent reach for 6 hours without saying much. She ran her scanner over every surface. She opened access panels and looked at what was inside, and then closed them again with an expression Cole could not quite read. When she came back to the entry corridor where Cole and Laura were waiting, she set her scanner down on a crate and sat on the floor with her back against the hull. "Okay," she said. "I need you to understand something." Cole sat down across from her. "Go. This ship should not be running." "I know." "No." She shook her head. "I mean, she should not be running on any principle that I was taught to understand. Her primary power core is active. I can read the output. It is not a residual reading. It is a live, stable, bureau-contained power generation cycle that has been running continuously for, by the oxidation markers on the secondary couplings, at least 50 years. Laura frowned. "What's the fuel source?" "That's the thing." Diane looked up at the hull above her, like she could see through it. "I can't find one. There is no fuel reservoir. There are no input feeds. There are no reaction chambers that I recognize." She paused. "There is a core assembly in the center of the ship that my scanner reads as active, but it will not give me a composition reading. It just returns the same result every time." "What result?" Cole said. Diane looked at him. "Unknown origin." Nobody said anything for a moment. "The Forge Protocol engineers," Cole said slowly. "The declassified notes from the program, the ones that leaked in 2018. They mentioned a collaboration, a technical exchange. The assembly denied it. But the notes described it as a partial knowledge transfer from an allied species that had been watching the program. Diane stared at him. You are telling me? I'm not telling you anything. I'm saying what the notes said. You are implying that this ship has a non-human power core. I'm implying the Forge Protocol engineers may have accepted some help. Diane looked at the scanner in her hand. Then she looked at the hull. Then she stood up, picked up the scanner, and said, I am going to need a lot more time in here. You have 4 days before yard access closes. Then I am not sleeping. She walked back toward the inner corridor. And you two are going to help me, because I am not figuring this out alone. Laura looked at Cole. Cole looked at Laura. You are going to tell me, Laura said, everything you know about Forge Protocol. Every document, every leak, every collector forum post, all of it. Cole pulled out his hard drive. I was hoping you'd say that. By the time Carl Briggs flagged their access on day 4 and told them it was time to vacate or pay for extended berth, Diane had mapped 40% of the ship's systems and had made 3 discoveries that she described, in order as impossible, also impossible, and I refuse to accept this, but here it is anyway. The first was the power core, which she had now fully confirmed was not human in origin and was not using any fuel source she could identify. It was simply generating power, clean and constant, the way a star generates light, because that was apparently what it did. The second was the navigation system. She had found the interface buried under a false panel in the bridge, and it was not a human interface. It was not any alien interface she recognized either. It was something that appeared to be a hybrid, human input methods layered over a deeper architecture that responded to the ship's non-human core. For Kalkin, when she powered the interface on, it displayed star charts. Not the settled systems, not any charted region, stars that she could not match to any database she had access to. The third discovery was the one that made Cole sit down and not say anything for a long time. The Ardent Reach had a crew manifest still loaded in her registry. 6 names from the original Forge Protocol crew who had taken her out on her final mission before the Vega incident. At the bottom of that manifest, and below the last name on the list, there was a single logged entry in the ship's system, time-stamped 62 years ago. It read, "We will return. Keep her ready." The lights in the ship were still on. Cole paid Carl Briggs for an extended berth and started making calls. The calls took 3 days because Cole was not important. He knew this. He had no title, no institutional backing, no government clearance. He was a man who had spent his adult life reading about things that other people made decisions about. And now he was sitting inside one of those things, trying to get someone with actual authority to listen to him. Nobody with actual authority wanted to listen to him. The Galactic Trade Assembly's Heritage Division sent him an automated acknowledgement and nothing else. The Human Diplomatic Corps routed his inquiry to a junior attaché named Aaron Greer, who was very polite and absolutely useless. The Military Historical Archive told him the vessel in question had been officially destroyed and suggested he verify his purchase documentation. "They think you're a crank," Laura said, not unkindly. She was cross-legged on the bridge deck with her hard drive and a cup of coffee, which she had somehow convinced Carl to keep stocked in the yard's break room. "I am a crank," Cole said. "You're a crank with the actual ship." "Yes, which is why I'd like someone official to acknowledge the actual ship exists." He leaned back in the navigation chair, which was the most comfortable seat on the bridge and had probably been designed for long-haul watches. "The problem is that the moment I tell anyone official, they have legal mechanisms to claim her." Diane looked up from the engine access panel she had been living inside. "Assembly salvage law. If a vessel is ruled to have active classified status, ownership reverts to the originating authority. Right. So, we need to establish her status before we report her existence. Cole nodded. Or establish that the originating authority no longer exists. Diane and Laura both went quiet. Forge Protocol, Laura said slowly, was a black-budget program under an emergency wartime authority that was dissolved in 2151. Correct. So, the originating authority doesn't legally exist anymore, which means the standard reversion clause may not apply. Cole pulled up the legal reference he had spent 2 days reading on very little sleep. There's a precedent from 2016-70. The Mallory case. Thoka, a vessel built under a dissolved emergency program, was ruled to belong to the purchaser under open market salvage law because there was no continuous institutional chain of custody. Laura stared at him. You actually found a precedent. I found a precedent. For this exact situation. For a situation close enough that a good lawyer could argue it. Diane set down her scanner. Do you have a good lawyer? I have Laura's college roommate who passed the bar 3 years ago and works in commercial property disputes. That's not the same thing. No. But Megan Park is brilliant, and she owes Laura a significant favor, and she is apparently very excited about the problem. Cole looked at his phone, where Megan's last message read, This is the best thing that has ever happened to me professionally. I am getting on a transport tonight. Megan Park arrived looking like someone had handed her a present she had not expected. She was tall, sharp-eyed, and had the energy of a person who had been waiting for a case worth her time. She walked the ship for 20 minutes, asked Diane 17 technical questions that she wrote down in a physical notebook, and then sat across from Cole in the bridge with her hands folded on the table. Here is where we are, she said. Your Mallory precedent is solid. I've already run it through 3 interpretive frameworks, and it holds in 2 of them. The third is ambiguous, which is fine. Ambiguous is not no. She opened her notebook. The issue is not legal status of ownership. I think we can defend that. The issue is disclosure requirements. Explain. The moment you attempt to move, operate, or register this vessel, you trigger mandatory disclosure to the Assembly Registry. At that point, regardless of ownership status, when they can impose an operational hold while they review the vessel's classification, that hold can last anywhere from 60 days to indefinitely. Cole felt the ceiling of the problem settle on him. So we can own her, but we can't use her. Not legally, not openly. Megan paused. However, she tapped her pen on the notebook. There is a provision in the Salvage Code, Section 7-14, that allows a private owner to conduct assessment operations on a purchased vessel without triggering registry disclosure, provided those operations are limited to non-navigational systems and remain within the originating yard's spatial boundary. Diane leaned forward. Non-navigational systems. Propulsion, power, internal systems, not navigation, not weapons, if any, not interstellar communication. The power core, Diane said, looking at Cole. Cole looked at Megan. How long can we run assessment operations under that provision? 90 days. And in 90 days. You file for legal status confirmation under Mallory, which I will have prepared and ready to submit the moment the 90 days expire, at which point we make the whole situation very public and very loud before anyone can impose an operational hold, because the hold mechanism requires a non-public process, and I will make absolutely sure this is not a non-public situation. Cole sat with that. Then he said, Diane, in 90 days, can you figure out how that engine works? Diane looked at her scanner. She looked at the access panel. She looked at the star charts still glowing on the navigation interface, charts of places nobody had mapped. "In 90 days," she said, "I can figure out how the engine works. I can probably figure out the navigation architecture. I cannot promise you anything about where those charts lead." "I'm not asking for promises." "Then yes." She picked up the scanner. "Yes, I can do it." Outside the viewport, Yard 7 rotated in the brown dwarf's light. Other ships drifted and listed and waited for the smelter. The Ardent Reach did not drift. She had not moved a single degree from her position since Cole had arrived. She was, Cole thought, waiting for something specific. He intended to find out what. The 63rd day was when everything changed. It was Diane who noticed it first, because Diane had been living in the engine room in a way that had stopped being metaphorical somewhere around day 20. She had set up a cot beside the main access panel, which Laura had decorated with a single hand-lettered sign that said, "This is normal and fine." On day 63, Diane came to the bridge at 2 in the morning. Cole was there because he had not been sleeping well, which was also something that had stopped being unusual. He was sitting in the navigation chair with a cup of tea going cold on the console, reading the same page of a Forge protocol document he had read 11 times. Diane set her scanner on the console. "It's changing," she said. Cole put down the document. "What is?" "The output from the core. I have been logging it every 6 hours since day 1. It has been completely stable, even the same number to 4 decimal places, every single reading." She pulled up her log on the scanner. 4 hours ago it changed. Cole looked at the log. The number was higher, not by a lot, by exactly enough to be deliberate. "What does that mean?" he said. "I have 2 theories." She sat on the edge of the console. Theory 1. The core is responding to the work I've been doing on the secondary systems. As I restore functions, the core is adjusting its output to accommodate them, like a body responding to exercise. And Theory 2. Diane looked at the navigation screen, where the unknown star charts were still glowing. Something changed out there, and the ship noticed. Cole followed her gaze. "You think she's aware?" "I think," Diane said carefully, "that the Forge protocol engineers built something that the allied species they worked with understood in a way the engineers probably didn't fully grasp. And I think that something has been aware, in whatever way it is aware, for 60 years. And I think that something may be responding to a signal or a change or an event that we cannot currently detect." Cole sat with that for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Megan, who answered with the alert voice of someone who had trained herself to wake up fully in under 2 seconds. "The 90 days?" he said. "How hard would it be to compress the timeline?" "Define compress." "We're on day 63, and I want to go public now instead of waiting 27 more days." Silence. Megan thinking. "I can do it. The filing is ready. I'd want 48 hours to pre-position the media contacts. If we're going loud, we go loud in a way that makes an operational hold politically impossible." "How do you make it politically impossible?" "We make it a human heritage story." Her voice had gone sharp and certain. "The last surviving vessel of Forge Protocol, the program that helped humanity earn its seat at the Galactic table, scheduled for the scrapyard and saved by a private citizen. We give it to every outlet simultaneously. Assembly bureaucrats can impose holds on classified assets. They cannot impose holds on beloved historical symbols without a public revolt." Cole looked at Diane. Diane looked at the scanner. 48 hours, Cole said. "Make it loud." Megan made it loud, and the story ran on every major network simultaneously on the 48th hour, which was a Friday morning, which Megan had calculated was the optimal time for maximum news penetration. It included photographs of the ship, Diane's technical documentation, a brief legal summary of the Mallory precedent, and a 30-second video clip that Laura had filmed of the Ardent Reach in Yard 7, not drifting. Lights on, alone in the brown dwarf light. The clip was the thing. There was something about watching a ship that was supposed to be dead, sitting there lit up and solid and entirely itself, that hit people somewhere below the level of thought. It spread faster than any of them had anticipated. By the end of the first hour, it had been shared 4 million times. By the end of the first day, the number was not something Cole could process comfortably. The Assembly's Heritage Division, which had sent him an automated acknowledgement and nothing else, Dubover called him personally before noon. The junior attaché Aaron Greer, who had been very polite and absolutely useless, sent a message asking if they could speak at his earliest convenience. 3 separate university archaeology and engineering departments reached out requesting access. A retired admiral named Vincent Cross, who had been alive during the Forge Protocol years and was apparently one of 3 people still living who had clearance-adjacent knowledge of the program. I posted a public statement saying that the discovery was real, the ship was genuine, and anyone who attempted to impose an operational hold on the Ardent Reach would have to explain themselves to him personally and to the entire watching public. Admiral Cross was 89 years old and had the moral authority of a man who had spent 60 years being right about things. The Assembly did not impose an operational hold. Megan submitted the legal filing at noon. By 3 in the afternoon, a preliminary ruling confirmed that the Mallory precedent applied. The Ardent Reach was, legally and finally, Cole's. He was sitting in the navigation chair when Megan called to tell him, "You own a mythical spaceship," she said, apparently. "What are you going to do with her?" Cole looked at the star charts on the navigation screen. Places nobody had mapped. Lights that might be stars or might be something else. "The crew manifest," he said. "The last logged entry. We will return." "You think they're still out there?" "I think this ship has been running for 60 years on a power source nobody understands, staying exactly where she was left, with the lights on." He paused. "I think she's been keeping herself ready. The way you'd keep yourself ready if you were expecting someone back." Silence on the line. "Cole," Megan said quietly. "Yeah. That's either the most wonderful thing or the most terrifying thing I've ever heard." He looked at the charts. "Probably both," he said. On the 90th day, Diane completed the engine mapping. She stood in the bridge doorway with her scanner and her notebook and 3 weeks of exhaustion carved into her face. And she said, "I know how it works," in the tone of someone who has just solved a problem and is not yet sure whether that is a good thing. Cole was there. Laura was there. Megan had flown back for this, which was either professional dedication or the fact that none of them could really stay away from the ship anymore. "Explain it," Cole said. "I can't, fully. Not in terms that match any human engineering framework. But I can describe what it does." Diane sat down. "The core does not consume fuel. It does not generate energy through any reaction. What it does is more like it reads the ambient energy state of the surrounding space and converts excess potential into usable output. It's almost like it borrows from the universe, and the universe doesn't notice." Nobody said anything. "The implications of that," Diane continued. "If it scales, and I believe it does scale based on the architecture, are that this ship can operate indefinitely without resupply. No fuel stops, no range limit, no dependency on established infrastructure. Laura exhaled slowly. The navigation system, Diane went on, is layered. The outer layer is human-built and interfaces with standard charting software. The inner layer is not human-built and charts something different. I've been calling it the deep layer. She pulled up the star charts on her scanner. The deep layer doesn't chart stars the way we chart them. It charts something I've been calling nodes. Concentrations of something the core seems to recognize. I cannot tell you what they are. I can tell you that the deep layer has a plotted course. It was set before we arrived. It hasn't changed. Where does it go? Cole said. Diane zoomed in on the chart. At the end of the plotted course, a single node pulsed with a slow, regular rhythm, like a beacon or a heartbeat. I don't know, she said. But she does. Cole stood up from the navigation chair and walked to the center of the bridge. The amber light was warm around him. The ship was quiet, the kind of quiet that was not empty, the kind of quiet that had something in it. The assembly has cleared us for operational status, Megan said. Official registration is filed. We're legal to move. I know. The university teams wanted access before we go anywhere. The military historians want access. Admiral Cross has asked for a briefing. I know. Cole. Laura's voice was gentle. What are you thinking? He looked at the star charts. He thought about 6 people who had taken this ship out into something they could not fully understand, in the early years when humanity was still proving itself, still learning what it meant to be part of a larger universe. He thought about a log entry, 62 years old, typed into a ship's registry by hands that had known they might not make it back. We will return. Keep her ready. I'm thinking, he said, that she's been ready long enough. He sat back in the navigation chair. It fit him exactly right, which he had noticed on the first day and had not mentioned to anyone. He placed his hands on the interface. The deep layer charts shifted, oriented, locked onto the plotted course like they had been waiting for this specific moment. The Ardent reach came fully alive around him. Not the partial hum of assessment operations, all of it. Every system at once, smooth and certain and enormous. More a ship that was not just a machine, but something that had been built to make a statement, and that had waited 60 years to finish making it. The yard's external camera, which Carl Briggs watched from his converted cargo container office, showed the Ardent reach rise from her position in the yard, slow and deliberate. Her dark hull catching the brown dwarf light differently now, catching it and releasing it in a way that was almost like breathing. She moved toward the yard's exit boundary. She did not drift. She did not list. Every degree of her motion was precisely chosen. Carl Briggs watched her go. He had been in the salvage business for 30 years. He had seen a lot of ships. He had learned not to get attached. He was, he would admit later, extremely attached. The Ardent reach cleared the yard boundary and oriented herself along a heading that did not match any established route in the settled systems. Inside, the navigation console showed one line of text in the deep layer interface. Not a star chart, not a coordinate, just words in a script that was half human and half something older. It translated, roughly, as, "Welcome back." Cole had not told anyone about the entry corridor yet. The way the lights had come on clean and full the moment he stepped inside. The way the navigation chair fit him exactly. The way the system had chimed once, a single low note, when he first came aboard. He thought about it now. The ship keeping herself ready. the plotted course that had been set before they arrived. He thought about the 6 names on the crew manifest and the empty slots below them. He thought about what the Forge protocol engineers had said all those years ago. We cannot win a war against species who have been traveling the stars for 10,000 years. But we can build something that makes them stop and look. Something that says, "We are not what you expected." Or the Ardent reach moved through the boundary of the settled systems and into the deep, navigating by a chart that was not charted anywhere, heading toward a node that pulsed like something alive and waiting. Cole Merritt, who had spent his whole life reading about the things other people made decisions about, put his hands on the interface and decided. The stars ahead were not ones he recognized. That was fine. He was exactly where he was supposed to be.